This is the First and Big Ten podcast with CNHI sports writers Kevin Brockway and Elton Hayes. It's time to talk college football.
Welcome back to the First and Big Ten podcast. Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNHI Sports Pennsylvania. And Elton, we've got the matchup for the Big Ten title game. It will be a rematch, Wisconsin against Ohio State. Wisconsin pulling it out with a win over Minnesota to get the axe back. They beat Minnesota in Minnesota 38-17. So kind of that magic carpet ride for Minnesota, and it's just a little bit short of a division title. They certainly had a great season at 10-2. But the Wisconsin Badgers get it done, and do they have a shot to beat Ohio State? I mean, the Buckeyes look like a machine right now, beating Michigan 56-27.
They do. This is, like you said, this is a matchup that Ohio State won pretty handedly earlier this season. They were able to get a 38-7 win, where they would contain Jonathan Taylor, which many teams cannot lay claim to this season. But one thing, if you're a Wisconsin fan, you saw a lot of production out of other players on offense outside of Jonathan Taylor last week, which is good for optimism, knowing that if Ohio State is able to corral him again, there are other guys on that team that can step up. But Ohio State has looked like a team that's been on a mission from week one. And I understand Wisconsin is going to enter this game on a 4-game win streak. That Ohio State loss was its last loss. I just really do not see any other team challenging Ohio State in this conference right now.
Yeah, really, and a terrific job done by Ryan Day. And, he might move into the Coach of the Year conversation here. I think he may end up winning it now that P.J. Fleck fell a little short. You can make a little bit of an argument for Tom Allen at Indiana, too, what he's done, getting them to 8 wins for the first time since 1993. But Ryan Day, sometimes it's not easy to take over for a legend. And listen, they do have a lot of talent at Ohio State. Urban Meyer kept the cupboard pretty full there. But you still have to go out and do it. And Ryan Day has done that this season. And his offense in particular, bringing in a first-year quarterback in Justin Fields. You've got the running game going with J.K. Dobbins, Chris Olave, a really good wide receiver. They're pretty balanced. They're stacked in all areas. But I think Ryan Day's offense, too, has a lot to do with that in terms of, keeping some of those spread principles from Urban Meyer, but also employing some West Coast offense principles, a lot of crossing routes. It just makes it really hard to stop, particularly with the talent they have on that field.
It does. Well, if you're Ryan Day, his coaching pedigree is impeccable. He's a disciple of Urban Meyer. He's a disciple of Chip Kelly, and that's where he kind of cut his teeth learning from those guys. And I don't know if there's anyone else out there who is more suited to take over this job than him. You throw in those 3 games that he served as an interim head coach last year when Urban Meyer was suspended. And, he kind of showed you a glimpse of what he's capable of. And, this is his program. He knows these guys. He's been around this program for a while. And this is very impressive. One thing that's really stood out to me that's been remarkable this year is we've noticed in Ohio State teams of years past, there's usually one game, during the season that they lost that they weren't supposed to. I don't know whether it was just a lack of focus, or what, but we've seen that not to be the case this year. Ohio State has thoroughly dominated every opponent on its schedule, with the exception of, the Penn State game a couple weeks ago was a 11-point victory. But outside of that, they've been, they've really just handled everyone in front of them, and it's a very impressive effort by Ryan Day and his coaches that he's assembled up there. And I agree with you, Kevin. I think he is on the fast track for Coach of the Year.
Yeah, and, I think, too, that was interesting. You touch on the Penn State game, and, they're up 21-0. They look like they're going to run away, but then they have a few turnovers in that game. Mm-hmm. Penn State cuts it 21-17, but they kept their composure in that game and finished out that game and won 28-17 despite the turnovers, despite a little bit of sloppy play in the third quarter. That shows you that at least they're somewhat battle-tested and that they can overcome a little bit of adversity. And, whether that happens this weekend against Wisconsin or in the college football playoff, at least they have that one game that they can kind of point to where, every other game they've pretty much dominated. But that's the one game I think they can point to where they could say, okay, well, if things get a little tough, we can pull together and we can get through this.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of everything in that game. Momentum changes. Justin Fields fumbled there in that first quarter in the Penn State end zone. They kind of shift momentum back to Penn State. They took a 2-touchdown lead at the halftime, and then there in that third and fourth quarter they had those fumbles where they really put themselves out of position to run away with that game, but they were able to turn things around. And like you said, if you're a coaching staff, you want every game to be a win, but you also want to be battle tested. And these are all points of emphasis that coaching staff can look at and kind of draw upon, once the going gets tough and they get into some of these battles, here in the conference championship game and then moving forward to the playoffs.
Yeah, and Jack Cohn, you touched on Wisconsin doing it in other ways in that game. Jack Cohn, 15-22, 280 yards, 2 touchdowns. Quintez Cephas, the wide receiver, was terrific in that game against Minnesota, 5 for 114 on the touchdown. So really in that game, Minnesota took Taylor away. Jonathan Taylor still had 2 touchdown runs, but only 76 yards rushing. But Wisconsin found another way to win, and I would gather that, given Ryan Day's defensive philosophy is to make teams one-dimensional, this is going to be another game where Cohn is really going to have to step up for Wisconsin to have a chance.
Yeah, and, he's a guy this season who, this is his first year in the full-time starting role, and, he had a very tough task at hand going on the road to Minneapolis to play Minnesota. Game day was there, a conference title or a divisional crown was on the line, and he got it done. 15 of 22, 280 yards, 2 touchdown passes, and more importantly, he showed that this is not just a one-dimensional offense, as the statistics have kind of pointed to this year. Showing that he can get it done. He's established a real good chemistry with Quintez Cephas, the receiver there, who had 5 catches for 114 yards and 1 touchdown. And they're going to need more of that next week if they're going to stand a chance against Ohio State. As good as Jonathan Taylor is, he can't do it on his own. And guys like Jack Cohn and Quintez Cephas in that passing attack are definitely going to have to pitch in and help out.
And then we touched earlier on the Ohio State's 56-27 win over Michigan, Elton. And, it's there's a little bit of noise in the system up in Ann Arbor about Jim Harbaugh. Obviously Michigan hung with Ohio State for a quarter at least, or, it's 14-13 at the end of the first quarter, 28-17 at the half, but then, Michigan just couldn't stay with them. And I just think it's, whether it's a talent issue or, a recruiting issue or what have you, or if it's, Ryan Day's scheme that's similar to Urban Meyer's, Harbaugh just can't find a way to beat Ohio State. And that's going to start to get a little bit old, even though Harbaugh is a favorite son there in Michigan, and he is an alum there, and a former star quarterback there. His work is cut out for him again, and there were a lot of preseason expectations in Ann Arbor, and they were not met.
Yeah, well, one thing you don't do is you don't ask him about it apparently at his post-game press conference, because he'll bite your head off. But we'll save that for the thumbs up, thumbs down segment. But, Michigan, if you're Jim Harbaugh, if you're a Michigan fan, you're in a difficult spot. He fell to 0-5 against Ohio State, and we all know that that Michigan-Ohio State game is the measuring stick for coaches in for those respective teams. He fell to 0-5. I know a lot of the conversation heading into the season was there's no Urban Meyer. This is a good chance for Jim Harbaugh to finally get his first win in this rivalry series. We showed that not to be the case. He got blown out, but I don't know what it is. I'm not going to say he's not a good coach. I think anyone who follows football, will agree that Harbaugh is a good coach. However, he just cannot seem to win the big game, and that was their 9th win. So you're not going to fire a coach who goes 9-3 every year. But like I said, you've got to get that win against Ohio State. If you're the head coach of the University of Michigan, that's what you're judged by. And Harbaugh is now 0-5 of those contests. So I don't know what his issue is. I don't know if he's not coaching his players up, for these games. I don't know if he's, I know that he's recruited well. He's got the talent. There is a bit of a talent gap there with Ohio State and Michigan, but that still should be no excuse. I don't know what Michigan is going to do moving forward to kind of try to close this gap.
Yeah, and, Shea Patterson, 305 yards passing in that game, but 18 of 43, he was a little off. He wasn't as sharp as he was in that Indiana game where he just looked terrific. I think that certainly they needed him to step up and have a huge game, and he didn't quite answer the bell there, didn't quite do that, even though he did pile up some yards in that game. But it was certainly disappointing, and, it happened at home, too, in the big house.
Yeah.
I thought that maybe you could be at least a little more competitive there, and the crowd could be into it, and they got off to a good start.
Mm-hmm.
They just couldn't sustain it depth-wise over time.
No, they couldn't. And, we got to give a shout-out to J.K. Dobbins. He's the name that we've mentioned a couple of times, the past week. But he did it again, 31 carries for 211 yards and 4 touchdowns. 3 touchdowns there in the first half. His run has been incredible this year.
Yeah, it's amazing. Him and Jonathan Taylor, you're talking about like 1 and 1A for, 2 of the best running backs in the country, let alone the Big Ten. And they're both definitely getting it done. Let's move on to Piscataway, New Jersey, where Rutgers, big news this week. They work out the kinks, they work out the deal, and they get Greg Schiano secured as their coach, going back to the future here. Schiano from 2001 to 2011, had some success when Rutgers was in the Big East. This is a little bit of a different animal now.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I know a bunch of Rutgers fans are, when they saw that, they broke that there late Saturday night. I think it was around midnight or 12:30 that I first saw that the two sides worked out an agreement. But, Rutgers fans, the memories of Schiano were great. He was competitive. He took them to bowl games and most of his years there. However, he's stepping into a different landscape. Rutgers is part of the Big Ten now. It has not been competitive in years. The first thing that he's going to have to do is really lock down recruiting in that state and keep some of those guys like Jonathan Taylor, some of those talented New Jersey players in state. And this is going to be a long rebuild process. He's not going to go in there right away and turn things around. This isn't the Big East. However, he's a good coach. He's got good history there. He's got good relationships. And this is a great start.
Yeah, and, I think it's, the credibility, the fact that he's done it before and had success there at a place that's really hard to have success. And, when he was last there, he obviously recruited the state of New Jersey well, and he recruited the state of Florida well. And he's obviously got, ties from Florida back in his days when he was a Miami defensive assistant in the 1990s. So I think that's going to be the formula again. Go down to Florida, get some speed. That's what Tom Allen has done, and he's been very successful in Indiana doing that. Trying to close the gap and keep all those best players from New Jersey from going to Penn State.
Yeah. Well, like you said, he's done it before. He has instant credibility, which definitely boosts that program's profile right now. It would be interesting to see how long it takes him to do this. And the good thing for him is I believe Rutgers will give him the time he needs to get this thing sorted out.
All right, so coming up, we will have our Thumbs Up, Thumbs Down segment. This is Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNHI Sports Pennsylvania on the First and Big Ten podcast.
Get the latest Big Ten, IU, Purdue, and Penn State football news by following the guys on Twitter. Kevin is at Kevin Brockway G1, and Elton is at EHDC12.
Okay, welcome back to the First and Big Ten podcast. Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNHI Sports Pennsylvania. Our Thumbs Up, Thumbs Down segment. I'm going to go first, Elton, and I'm going to go with Peyton Ramsey, the Indiana quarterback. 337 yards passing, 42 yards rushing, total of 5 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns passing, 2 touchdowns rushing, and he gets that plunge from 1 yard in overtime, the quarterback sneak that lifts Indiana to a 44-41 win over Purdue to get the bucket back, the old Oaken bucket, in that big rivalry game. And with that win, Indiana goes to 8-4. They improve their bowl stock, and their first 8-win season since 1993. 26 years. So, and Peyton Ramsey is really a guy that, stepped into a situation with Michael Penix being hurt. He's really emerged as a leader, a tough kid, scrambles, takes shots, and really has done a nice job all season, really saving Indiana's season when Penix went down.
He's the embodiment of college football. Here's a guy who started last year, was supplanted this year by Michael Penix. Unfortunately, Penix got hurt, so he was inserted back into that starting lineup. But he stayed the course. He didn't explore the transfer portal. He didn't hop into the transfer portal. He stayed there, and what a fitting way for him to end his season, the regular season, to win a rivalry game, to give Indiana its 8th win, and to be playing it as a starter in the bowl game. So congratulations to Peyton Ramsey, and I'm with you there on you giving him his your first thumbs up. My first thumbs up is going to go to the Rutgers administration on finally getting a deal done with Schiano. This looked unlikely last week. Like I said, under the cloak of darkness on Saturday night, they announced that a deal was done, and I'm just glad that things not going to drag on. I believe he was the only fit for this position right now. He was the only one who would have really quenched the Rutgers fan base thirst, and so I'm going to give Greg Schiano my first thumbs up, and the Rutgers administration.
It's going to be interesting, Elton, if he can get that program going in 2 or 3 years. How much tougher the Big Ten East is going to be with Tom Allen having Indiana on the rise. Those are 2 programs that are going to be interesting to watch. Coming up the next few seasons in terms of if I were to buy stock right now, I would certainly buy stock in Indiana, and I would probably buy stock in Rutgers just because I think Schiano has what it takes, to get it to a point where, they'll at least be a little bit more competitive, maybe make some bowl games and so forth. And, particularly if he can, there's still probably that gap between Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State in the rest of the division. But I think Rutgers can make a move the next few years if Schiano, recruits well. So my second thumbs up is going to go to Wisconsin. This is a team we thought was kind of dead in the water after those back-to-back losses to Illinois and Ohio State. But they stayed the course. They got the ball back to Jonathan Taylor, who ran for 3 200-yard games, and then Jack Cohn obviously stepped up to beat Minnesota to get not only to get the Axe back, but to secure a trip to the Big Ten title game. So Wisconsin gets my second thumbs up.
Yeah, Wisconsin, man. Like I said, this is a team that everyone thought was dead in the water after that 38-7 loss to Ohio State. They've since won 4 games in a row, and they're in line to play for yet another Big Ten championship. And, very impressive job done there by Paul Chryst, who has proven himself to be one of the elite coaches in the conference. So I'm going to agree with you on that one. My second thumbs up is going to go to Ohio State running back J.K. Dobbins. On a team loaded with superstars, Dobbins continues to find ways to stand out and separate himself. He rushed for a season-high 211 yards, 31 carries, which was also his second highest total this year. He ran for 36 carries against Penn State a week before, so he's putting on the miles the last couple of weeks. But, 211 yards, 4 touchdowns, 3 of those which he scored in that first half. J.K. Dobbins is playing at a very high level right now, and he gets that second thumbs up.
Yeah, no question. J.K. Dobbins, one of the best running backs in the country for sure. Okay, my third thumbs up is going to go to Northwestern for beating Illinois in the rivalry game, 29-10, finishing the season the right way. 378 yards rushing in that game. Really an impressive job on the ground. And Northwestern, Pat Fitzgerald, there hasn't been a lot to cheer about in Evanston this season, but certainly Northwestern managed to do that here to finish the year 3-9 and to knock off their rival and at least have a little bragging rights. Yes,
this is definitely one that I selected when we did our predictions last week as a win in Illinois' column. But hey, if you're Pat Fitzgerald, if you're a member of the Northwestern fan base, yeah, you're disappointed that you only won 3 games this year, but at least you could hang your hat on that you beat a rival and you won the Land of Lincoln trophy. So my third thumbs up is going to go to Iowa defensive end A.J. Epinesa. Heading into the season, Epinesa was valued as one of the conference's premier edge rushers. He capped out the regular season with 14 tackles, 2 sacks. None of those tackles were solo against Nebraska to help Iowa pick up its 9th win of the year. So A.J. Epinesa, defensive end from Iowa, gets my third thumbs up.
Yeah, a dominating defensive performance on the knockoff, Nebraska there on that final field goal. My first thumbs down, Elton, is going to go to Jeff Brom for not going for two in the first overtime. At that point, it's 38-37. Why don't you leave it in the hands of your players? You had the momentum in the second half. You had that play that was working with Bryson Hopkins over the middle, wide open twice. One time it was dropped, but you could have probably ran that play again, gotten the two, and gotten out of there with the victory, and at least had a little bragging rights. Only 4 wins all season for Purdue. That would have put a good taste in your mouth in terms of winning that rivalry game.
Yeah, I just don't understand. There's nothing to lose by going for it. You're not going to a bowl game. It's the best you could do is spoil your rival's season. So, no arguments from me on that one. My first thumbs down is going to go, I'm going to stick with Iowa on this one. It's going to go to Nate Stanley. Stanley entered the season as one of the conference's veteran quarterbacks. He had pedigree. He's been in that. I believe he's been there a 3-year starter. He finished the regular season 11 of 24 for 99 yards and 1 interception. Very underwhelming numbers. It's definitely not numbers you would expect out of a quarterback of his stature. Against an Iowa defense that has not been against the Nebraska defense that has not been good this year. So Nate Stanley is going to get my first thumbs down.
My second thumbs down, Elton, is going to go to Illinois. Looked like that they were looking ahead to the bowl game and losing to Northwestern 29-10. Just a really flat all-around performance. You're at home in that rivalry game. Didn't step up. Robinson, 108 yards passing. Only 14 rushing yards in that game. Couldn't get the running game going. And, couldn't get those turnovers that have kind of fueled them throughout the season.
Yeah, no, hey, anything can happen with the Land Lincoln trophies on the line. But, the good thing about Illinois is, they'll ruminate over this for a couple of days, and then it's on to bowl practice on Sunday. So disappointing for Illinois to lose its last regular season game, but they'll have a chance to kind of make up for it with a bowl victory wherever it ends up going. My second thumbs down of the week is going to go to Minnesota. This is a game, I'm not saying anything bad about the job that Minnesota's done this year. Obviously, to go 10-2 overall, 7-2 in conference is very, very respectable. But I just expected more. This game was touted, the last, few weeks as being the premier game of the Big Ten this week. Minnesota was hosting Wisconsin, a chance to go to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game. Game day was there, and Minnesota kind of underwhelmed. It's a little disappointing. So Minnesota's going to get my second thumbs down of the week.
My third thumbs down is going to go to Nebraska. This is a season that fell short of a bowl again. They go 5-7. Scott Frost calling 2 timeouts at the end to try to ice the kicker. I thought was a little bit of a, kind of a strange move there. And then, Keith Duncan makes the kick to win the game. And then, runs over the sideline a little bit, gives Scott Frost his business, a 48-yard field goal. What a clutch kick by Duncan. But Scott Frost, they still have a lot of work to do, particularly defensively, setting a more physical tone in Lincoln right now. They don't have it. They need to get that physicality during the offseason.
Yeah, they do. Like you said, bit of a disappointing season for them. It looks like for a chance there that they were going to be bowl eligible. But like you said, Keith Duncan hit 2 field goals that game. That last one, that 48-yarder, kind of, doomed Nebraska. But no arguments for me there on your second thumbs down. My third thumbs down is going to go to Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh in his post-game comments. Not unsurprisingly, he's going to be a little bit disappointed after that loss, or a lot disappointed after that loss in the way it happened. But when a reporter asked him about the talent gap there and the recruiting, and Harbaugh kind of got snippy with them and said, I'll answer your questions but not your insults, which I thought was just a bad look. Harbaugh's kind of, his shtick is being the kind of abrasive, brash guy. But, when a reporter's asking you an honest question about, what I think everyone else is thinking, that's not the time to kind of get smart with them and be rude and disrespectful like that. So Jim Harbaugh gets my third thumbs down for his out-of-line comments after that game.
Yeah, he's obviously disappointed in, how the season played out in terms of, the expectations there. But, maybe needs to, hit a little harder in the recruiting trail to kind of close the gap from a talent perspective with Ohio State.
This is Michigan. It's still a premier program. Michigan can kind of go after anyone at once, and that was an honest question. I think a fair question to ask, and for him to have that response was just a bad look.
All right, so Elton, coming up, we'll have Dustin Schutte from Saturday Tradition on the First and Big Ten podcast. This is Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNHI Sports Pennsylvania.
Don't go anywhere, because it's time for Voices of the Gridiron. Here's today's special guest.
And welcome back to the First and Big Ten podcast. Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNHI Sports Pennsylvania. And we're joined by our first ever podcast guest. He predicted that Minnesota was going to win the Big Ten West. He came close on that. Didn't quite happen in the Paul Bunyan-Axe game in Minneapolis this week, but certainly a very strong prediction nonetheless. Dustin Schutte from Saturday Tradition. Dustin, pleasure to have you on.
Hey, Kevin. Hey, Elton. Thanks for having me on again.
Always good to speak with you.
Well, Dustin, the stage is set, for Indianapolis, Ohio State, and Wisconsin. Obviously we saw that Ohio State, thumped Wisconsin early in the season, 38-37. Is there any chance for Wisconsin to win this game? And if so, what's going to have to happen?
Yeah, I don't know that there is much of a chance, and I know that that's not going to be too well received maybe among Badger fans, but when you look at kind of the direction the two teams have gone this season, it just seems to me that Ohio State is trending upward in all directions. Justin Fields looks like he's getting better. J.K. Dobbins has been outstanding the last few weeks. The offensive line has played as well, I think, as anyone would have ever expected. This is obviously a good offensive line that Ohio State has, but it's also a unit that we thought would take some time maybe to gel, and they were good earlier in the season, and now they're really playing well. So if Wisconsin wants to win, the recipe for them for the past 3 years has been hand Jonathan Taylor the football. Well, Ohio State shut that down twice. 3 years ago, they held him to 41 yards. Earlier this year, they held him to 52 yards on 20 carries. I think that Paul Chryst and that Wisconsin offense is going to have to be creative. One of the things that we talked about earlier this season was, will Wisconsin have that passing attack? Will it be able to stretch defenses? And early in the season when Wisconsin was playing teams like USF, it was able to do that. Jack Cohn was able to get the ball to his receivers downfield. But since that time, Wisconsin just doesn't have that deep threat. It doesn't have the ability to stretch the field. I'm going to throw out this number for you, and this is what I think is really telling. Wisconsin has 25 pass plays of 20 yards or more. That's second lowest in the Big Ten, tied with Rutgers. So that's not good. The recipe to beating Ohio State is being able to test that secondary, set up the run, and be able to have multiple threats offensively. And so far through, the last couple of weeks, they just haven't been able to do that against really good defenses. So I'd give the chance of an upset not very high. Obviously, it's college football. Anything can happen, but you're just going to have to see an incredible game out of Wisconsin, I think, if they want to upset Ohio State.
The cupboard was pretty full when Ryan Day got there, but does he get your vote for Big Ten Coach of the Year, or do you consider P.J. Fleck or maybe even Tom Allen at Indiana for authoring, Indiana's best season since 1993?
Yeah, I think I really do think Ryan Day deserves a lot of credit here, because when you look at it's not just that he had a pretty full cupboard, it's the fact that he made some of the staff changes defensively that he needed to make in order to get Ohio State playing at this level defensively. I mean, these pieces were here last year, and this was a mediocre at best defense at times. That it gave up 49 points to Purdue, it gave up over 50 points to Maryland, and it was a constant criticism of the Buckeyes last year. So Ryan Day, in his first season at Ohio State, comes in and he gets Greg Madison and Al Washington. He steals them from Michigan. He brings in Jeff Hafley, who is now a Frank Broyles Award finalist. And you've really seen that transition. Now this isn't just a mediocre defense. This is one of the best defenses in college football, and it makes Ohio State one of the most complete teams. So when you pair that with the ability he's able to get Justin Fields in the transfer portal, he goes 12-0. Not only 12-0, but he beats every team on that schedule by double figures, winning 11 of those games by 24 points or more. I don't care how good Ohio State is. To do that in your first season, to make the changes he saw necessary to get this team to national championship caliber team, I don't think anybody expected this. You might have expected Ohio State to win the Big Ten East, maybe to win the Big Ten championship. But if we were talking about Ohio State being one of the two best teams in college football last season under the first-year head coach Ryan Day, I don't think that would have been a thing many people were talking about. That's no disrespect to PJ Fleck or Tom Allen, but I just think when you compare it to what Ryan Day has done and the level that Ohio State is playing at right now, he's a no-brainer for the Coach of the Year.
Hey, Dustin, I want to shift gears to talk about the Heisman right now. I know earlier this year when we spoke, we kind of talked about dark horse candidates to emerge from the conference, at the end of the season. I wanted to bring up a guy who, people are talking about, but not really on a nationwide scale, is Justin Fields. You look at his numbers this year. He's completing 68% of his passes, 37 passing touchdowns against 1 interception, 470 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns. He's coming off of a 4-touchdown, 304 passing yards performance against Michigan. Why do you think his name isn't really mentioned up there when compared against the Joe Burrows of the world? When you look at his body of work that he's put together, it's really remarkable. 12-0, first-year starter, and his team's number 1 in the college football playoff race.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's really 2 factors here, and number 1 is the fact that he's got 2 other guys on his team that are pretty good too, and that's, obviously J.K. Dobbins and Chase Young. So he's not the sole guy coming out of Columbus that has all the attention. If he didn't have Dobbins in the backfield, putting up 200 yards against Michigan, if he didn't have Chase Young, recording 4 sacks in games against Wisconsin and then Penn State, he might be a little bit more highly thought of. The other aspect of this, too, is, you look at Joe Burrow and him putting up some big numbers, and obviously he's won some big games, but what happens to Joe Burrow if you give him Ohio State's defense and he doesn't have to play in any second halves? Or what happens if Ohio State's defense isn't nearly as good as what you're seeing and he plays for a full 4 quarters? What would those numbers look like? So I think that's a big part of it and that nobody is really talking about. It just seems like Joe Burrow is the hands-down candidate to win the Heisman Trophy. And that's not to take anything away from Burrow. He's been outstanding this season. He's led LSU to some big wins. But I also think that if LSU's defense was as good as Ohio State's and he's playing in 2 quarters and maybe sometimes just 3 quarters, then we're having a completely different conversation, and I think Fields would definitely be maybe a better contender in that Heisman race.
Okay. Well, I know folks in Pennsylvania, it snowed over the weekend. They're looking at bowl destinations. They want to go somewhere warm. Penn State's sitting at 10-2 second in the Big Ten East. I know a lot on Penn State's bowl projections hinge on this weekend's contest between Wisconsin and Ohio State. I believe if Wisconsin, keeps it close, there might be a chance that they can play their way into the Rose Bowl, depending on how the rankings shake out. The Ohio State blowout would all but certainly, I assume, send Penn State to the Rose Bowl. What are you looking at right now in terms of Penn State's bowl projections?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to tell because there's so many factors. I can't imagine that Penn State is not playing in a warm weather bowl game with that 10-2 record. I think even maybe the Outback Bowl has been mentioned, and a lot of it has to do with the pecking order, how well fans travel. I mean, Penn State fans, they travel well, so that's not going to be an issue. I would think that, like you said, there's an outside chance that maybe the Rose Bowl. I would think the Outback Bowl might be high on that list because I think it's been quite a while since they've been to the Outback Bowl. There's obviously a chance at a New Year's Six Bowl where they might land and how those things kind of shake out. I'm not too sure. There's so many different scenarios, but Penn State played an excellent season. I think that when you look at what Penn State did this year, regardless of what bowl game they're at, they're a year ahead of schedule, and they're more than deserving of another trip to whether it's Florida, Pasadena. I think that fans should be really excited about where they're headed. I'm not the best at the bowl projections, so but I would say Rose Bowl, Outback Bowl would probably be my top 2, but obviously a New Year's Six Bowl is certainly in the mix for the Nittany Lions.
Dustin, your thoughts about how the Purdue and Indiana seasons ended up and really the trajectory of the 2 programs, how, swiftly they changed in a year's time, where Purdue looked like they were on the come last year, and now at the end of this year, Indiana looks like the program on the come.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing from both sides, really, and I can break it up into two different parts here, is I think when you look at, first we'll start with Purdue, when you look at what Jeff Brom was able to do this year, considering he lost so many players. He lost his starting quarterback in Elijah Sindelar. He lost his backup quarterback in Jack Plummer. He lost Rondale Moore. He lost some, really good key pieces. He had a lot of inexperience. At times they were starting 9 freshmen, redshirt or true. They had 22 freshmen on the 2 deep. And still, this was a team that was competitive in games against Wisconsin. They were competitive against Indiana and Iowa. This is a team that still had a chance to go bowling in late November. And I think if you looked at the laundry list of injuries, this is a team that played most of its season without its 2 best defensive players in Lorenzo Neal and Marcus Bailey. There's a lot of reason for hope in West Lafayette, because you look at what they were able to do, how competitive they were, how good the offense was this season, even without some of their key pieces. And then you look at, they've got another top 30, maybe even top 25 recruiting class coming in. Obviously, you'll get Rondale Moore back, in the quarterback situation, regardless of who starts next year, looks like it's in a really healthy position. So I know that going from 6-6 and back-to-back bowl games to 4-8 isn't exactly what Purdue fans had hoped for this year. But I think that if you look at how the team performed, how it fought, and some of those glimmers of hope, I think there's really a lot of excitement and hope for the future at Purdue, not just to be a bowl team, but to be a Big Ten West contender. And then you look at Indiana, and again, this is a program that it looks like it's going to be a team that can sustain success. I know that they have some senior pieces this year, that some key wide receivers that might be gone next year. But Tom Allen brought in 2 of Indiana's highest-ranked recruiting classes. I think he owns the stat for 6 of the highest-rated 10 players in Indiana history have come in under Tom Allen's watch. So, and you're able to get to an 8-4 season. You have a chance to win 9 games. So not only can Tom Allen go on the recruiting trail and just kind of sell Indiana that it's building, he can make the argument that it's there. The next step is obviously to beat what you might call a helmet school and beat a Michigan State, a Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State. And that would kind of be the next step. But you got to 8 wins for the first time in 25 years. You're ranked in the AP poll for the first time in 25 years. You have a chance to get to 9 wins, which is unheard of in Bloomington. There's a lot of reason for optimism, and I don't think this is just a flash in the pan for the Hoosiers either. I think that this is a team that can continue to hit 7, 8, maybe even 9 wins per season. The big question will be, will they ever have that chance playing in the Big Ten East with the likes of Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State to ever get to a Big Ten East contender status? And I think that's yet to be determined. But again, there's no reason Indiana can't be a consistent bowl contender. And when you look at the history of Indiana, that is more than good enough for the Hoosiers.
Well, my poor friend Cliff Olson is a huge Rutgers fan. He came to the Rutgers-Indiana game. Does he have reason for hope now with Greg Schiano coming back, or how will the second act, you think, work out in Piscataway, New Jersey, with him in the Big Ten as opposed to the Big East?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know Rutgers fans really wanted Greg Schiano back. He's already won a few recruiting battles just on his own locker room. He's able to get 4-star quarterback Art Sitkowski, I can never pronounce that name properly, to stay at Rutgers. He was the starter in 2018, and then had thought about transferring out. So Schiano was able to get him to stay. I don't know. Sometimes the second act is really tough. And Rutgers just has kind of been the outlier in the Big Ten. Even at times under DJ Durkin, Maryland has been competitive every now and again. And obviously they're going through a coaching change right now. So I think that there's some hope for Maryland. But at Rutgers, I just don't know if you can get much past 6-6 in Piscataway. Maybe a 7-win season, and maybe that'll be just fine. I don't know. But you're right. Schiano's success came in the Big Ten or in the Big East, not in the Big Ten East. So I think he's got his challenges. I'm not quite optimistic. I thought that they should have gone with maybe a guy from Chris Creighton from Eastern Michigan, or maybe a Lance Leipold up at Buffalo, somebody who's a little bit younger, maybe has experience building a program. Obviously, Schiano does have that experience, but whether or not he's going to have the patience to try to, build this thing up, use the time he needs to build this thing up into a contender, I just don't know how that's going to go. And the other aspect of this, too, is, Schiano's been with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's been at Ohio State. Is he a threat to potentially leave if there's a bigger job coming open? And I think that's a legitimate concern for Rutgers, and maybe that's why you saw things fall apart the first time when they were meeting last week. So there's a lot of concern I have about Greg Schiano, but at the same time, there aren't a whole lot of better candidates out there. So I think you can be lukewarm. I think you can be cautiously optimistic, but I wouldn't expect this to be the Rutgers that you saw in the Big East.
Dustin, tell us where we can find your work.
Yeah, if you go to SaturdayTradition.com, you can follow us on Twitter at Tradition, or you can follow me on Twitter at Schutte CFB. That's at SCHUTTE CFB. And it's all Big Ten all the time. And obviously we're closing up football season. It's we'll always be talking Big Ten football, but we'll also have creep into some Big Ten basketball here in the coming weeks and months too.
No question. And Dustin does great work. We appreciate it. Thanks for coming on, Dustin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Good
Thanks, Elton. Really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Okay, that's Dustin Schutte from Saturday Tradition, and this is Kevin Brockway with the First and Big Ten podcast. Coming up, our predictions for Ohio State against Wisconsin.
Want to see more from Kevin and Elton? Subscribe to a CNHI newspaper near you.
Welcome back to the First and Big Ten podcast. Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNHI Sports Pennsylvania. Prediction time, Elton, and only one game to predict. It's the big one.
Yeah. The season has flown by, my friend.
Unbelievable. Unless you want to pick some of the other games, and the other championship. We could do like the MAC championship or whatever. No. I don't know. It's been too long of a season for that, I think. We'll stick with what we know, right? The SEC championship game, right?
But there we go.
LSU, Georgia.
We even head out west of the Pac-12 championship game on Friday.
All right. Well, I don't. This is kind of anticlimactic because I think we both know where we're going to go here. Ohio State, Wisconsin. Obviously, the rematch of the 38-7 game. I honestly, it's a 16-point spread. I honestly don't see any chance that Wisconsin pulls this one out. I'm going to go with Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this matchup before. 2 months ago, Wisconsin, for as much talent as it has, was only able to muster a touchdown against this Ohio State defense. Ohio State's playing, like I said, I think it's as good as anyone in the country right now. I think they're the team to beat nationally. I think Ohio State moves to 13-0 and enters the college football playoffs as the number one seed with the win.
Yeah, and the game will be in Indianapolis, but I will be
in your backwoods, in your back door.
In my backwoods, but I'll actually be at an Indiana-Wisconsin game. But my boss, George Bremer, will be covering it. So if you want to check the Herald Bulletin's website, we'll have plenty of coverage. It's going to be certainly a festive atmosphere here. We'll be seeing a lot of Hang On Sloopy in the streets of Indianapolis, I have a feeling, late into Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think when the season started, I think people were split 50-50 on Michigan or Ohio State winning the East. And I think it was conventional wisdom that whoever won the East was going to win the conference. Here Ohio State is right now. No Urban Meyer, no Dwayne Haskins, no problem. Like Dustin was saying, guys like Chase Young, J.K. Dobbins, Justin Fields, Chris Olave. I mean, this Ohio State is loaded. Ryan Day has done an impressive job, with just kind of carrying that momentum from the Urban Meyer era over into his tenure, and they've just been nothing short of impressive.
Well, we'll have one more First and Big Ten podcast next week, wrapping up the Ohio State-Wisconsin game, and then also talking about bowls, because Indiana will be bowl-bound, Penn State will be bowl-bound. A total of, 10 teams going to bowls in this conference, so we'll run down all of them next week.
Sounds good.
All right, for the First and Big Ten podcast, this is Kevin Brockway from CNHI Sports Indiana with Elton Hayes from CNHI Sports Pennsylvania, signing off.
Thanks for listening to your number one source for college football and Big Ten news, the First and Big Ten Podcast. Enjoy the games.